Hello, High Five Live. Here we are at the historic Liberty Jail with my good friend Daren Saunders. We're so excited to be here. We had a nice little flight over, and here we are in Missouri. I'm gonna just walk you around here. We're not going inside, and I'm gonna show you why we're not going inside. Um, we're not going inside because the sister missionaries and I think some of the senior couples as well offer for these sites free virtual tours. In fact, there's even a phone number there. That's probably backwards. I don't know, but I would invite each of you and remind each of you that one of the purposes of this virtual tour is to try to bring attention to our missionaries who are desperately wanting to use their time to share the message and take you through inside historic sites just like this one. Um, so I am going to turn the time over to Daren again. For those of you that didn't get to watch Daren's other video, and Sharon, I'd invite you to go watch that one. But Daren is give me your exact title again.
Training Division of Seminaries and Institutes.
There you go. And but specifically over the role, right, of the tour.
Church history workshop director.
A million times and has such an awesome knowledge and teaches it in such a neat way. And anyway, so we've invited him to join us again and to talk to us about the historic Liberty Jail. So, Daren, it's all you.
Well, thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be with you guys again. I've enjoyed following along with you guys this week and seeing these wonderful, beautiful sites. And how exciting. I wish people could visit there live right now, but the fact that the virtual tours are going on and what you guys are doing is providing an absolutely wonderful service. So thank you so much for what you guys are doing. And I'm sure many others have enjoyed it as I have this week. But we're here at the historic Liberty Jail, and this is a time, friends, by the time we're here in 1838, we are well into the Mormon conflict. Of course, we had 1833 in independence, where the Saints were kicked out of Jackson County, went all through the persecution there. That's been 5 years ago now, and things settled down for a while and then heated back up again on the Election Day battle in Gallatin, Missouri. And we won't do too much with that because I want to talk about this site, but those kinds of things were what heated the battle up again between the Missourians and the Mormons and caused more of a conflict. And after the Election Day battle at Gallatin, then you had the Battle of the River. You end up getting the massacre. And then on October 31st, 1838, Far West was surrounded by 2,500 Missouri State militia. And our Mormon leader of the Mormon Defenders, his name was Colonel Hinkle. He ends up becoming a traitor that day because he takes Joseph with some of the leaders out past Far West, down outside of the town for a little ways. And there's supposed to be a negotiation of peace with a General Samuel Lucas. And he's there with his troops. And of course, you might remember that Hinkle had made a deal with Lucas to trade Joseph in for his own family's freedom and to leave him alone. And so Hinkle becomes a traitor that day. And Joseph and the other leaders are arrested. And they're taken in by Lucas and his troops. They end up staying that night there outside of Far West in a cold rainstorm. And the next morning on November the 1st, Lucas holds a court martial and finds these men to be guilty and says that they need to be shot and to be taken to the Far West town square the next day and to be shot. And he orders Brigadier General Alexander Donovan, that name might sound familiar to you, to take this assignment and take him to Far West and shoot him in the town square the next morning. Well, you all remember, I think, the famous statement that Donovan made as he bitterly opposed this He was totally against it. He said, I'm not going to do it. It is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order. And if you execute those men, I will hold you before an earthly tribunal. So help me God, he said. And so they were taken to Far West the next morning, but it was to see their families and to gather some personal effects. And before they were hauled off down to Independence at first, I wanted to share with you a scripture.
What you're hearing.
As Joseph looked back on this, friends, he remembered what this day was like, being pulled away from his family. And the scripture reads in section 122, and this is one of the letters that he wrote while he was here in the Liberty Jail. And it says this in section 122, verse 6. If thou art accused with all manner of false accusations, if thine enemies fall upon thee, if they tear thee from the society of thy father and mother, brethren and sisters, and if with the drawn sword thine enemies tear thee from the bosom of thy wife and of thine offspring, and thine elder son, although but 6 years of age, shall cling to thy garments and shall say, my father, what are these men going to do with you? And if then he shall be thrust from thee by the sword, and thou be dragged to prison, and thine enemies prowl around thee like wolves for the blood of the Lamb.
No, it's on now.
Joseph reflected on that and that experience of being hauled off that day from the Far West site, what we call it today. Lucy Mack was able to get up there close to her sons and to these prison wagons, and was able to reach out her hand and touch Joseph's. And Joseph said to her, God bless you, mother, as they were taken away. So they're taken down to Independence for just a few days. It was November 4th through the 8th that they're down there. And they're awaiting the time to go to Richmond to have a hearing with Judge Austin King. And they have to have this hearing because they have to determine if there's going to be a trial to indict these men for murder and for treason. That's the crime that they were accused of, treason, which is really ridiculous because treason is an offense against a nation, not a state. And so they were really out of their league with this, but treason was also an unbailable crime. And so these men could not post bail. They had to be held over in jail until the time of the trial. And so what really happened is Joseph and his friends become, these leaders with him, become hostages in order for the saints to be tossed out of Missouri. And once they're gone, then Joseph and these other men are going to be released. But they suffer unspeakable hardships in the Liberty Jail. Really quickly, though, before they get there in Richmond, they're there for about 3 weeks. And I think all of you will probably remember, we call it the Richmond Jail, but really it's a log home where these men are in chains. And you remember that Joseph stood up in these chains and he rebuked the guards when they were just saying terrible things about how they had persecuted the men and the women and the children of the saints. And it's an awful thing, as you recall. And Joseph stands up and rebukes them. Silence, ye fiends of the infernal pit, he said. And Parley P. Pratt, of course, recalled that and wrote that down. So that all happens in Richmond, and they're held hostage there. Eventually, they're taken to Liberty. You're seeing that jail there that Dave just showed you a moment ago. That's the site of where the jail once stood. And it was Joseph and Hiram. It's Caleb Baldwin, Alexander McCrae, Lyman White, and Sidney Rigdon at first. Sidney gets released after a short time because he becomes so very ill. But in the Liberty Jail, Joseph wrote 29 letters. Or excuse me, he wrote a couple of different letters. One of those letters, 29 pages long. I wanted to share with you just one little portion of this because you know this. This is from sections 121 through 123. We have a condensed version of that 29-page letter, not 29 letters. I apologize for that. The 29-page letter, and you'll recognize a portion of this, but not all of it. Listen to this little part right here. The inhumanity and the murderous disposition of this people. It shocks all nature. It beggars and defies all description. It is a tale of woe, a lamentable tale, a tale of sorrow, too much to tell, too much for contemplation, too much for human beings. It cannot be found among the heathens. It cannot be found among the nations where kings and tyrants are enthroned. It cannot be found among the savages of the wilderness. Yea, and I think it cannot be found among the wild and ferocious beasts of the forest. That a man should be mangled for sport, women be robbed of all that they have, their last morsel for substance, and then be violated to gratify the hellish desires of the mob, and finally left to perish with their helpless offspring clinging around their necks. Just a sad, sad tale as Joseph recalls this and what took place there at the Liberty Jail, and especially during the Mormon conflict in Missouri. But in April of 1839, they're taken to Gallatin after spending 128 days in this terrible cell, this dungeon. It was from December 1st until April the 6th. And they're finally taken to Gallatin in 1839, where there's a grand jury hearing. They decide they're going to move it to Boone County. And on the way there, the guards over Joseph and the other leaders allowed them to escape. And Joseph and his friends end up going to Illinois to meet the main body of the saints. But they came to Liberty because there wasn't a jail in Daviess County. And again, they were charged to against the state or the nation, really, with treason, which was a state crime. But many of the Mormon men in Richmond were challenged and really pushed to testify against Joseph. And if they would just testify that he wasn't a prophet, that he was a false prophet, they would be released and they could live in Missouri. Their families could stay there. They wouldn't have anything to worry about. And I love the story of a man by the name of Chandler Holbrook. Chandler Holbrook is one that I think we all want to be like, because he was told that he would remain in that prison until he would testify against Joseph. And this is what Brother Holbrook said as his reply. I will stay in this dungeon until the worms carry me out of that keyhole. And then I won't. Isn't that amazing? I love that. That is a stalwart follower of the prophet there. I love Chandler Holbrook. Well, the Liberty experience was awful. It was extremely cold. It was in the dead of winter. If any of you have been back to Missouri, you know what I'm talking about when we talk about the cold winters and the humidity, which makes it even worse. It just gets into your bones. It's so bad. It's so cold. And the food was coarse. It was disgusting. They got sick. I mean, their bathroom was a bucket in the corner. Their nerves became frazzled. They even tried to escape a couple of times, and they failed and were punished for trying to escape. You can understand why they would. And there's a lot of misunderstandings with what happened there, because many people don't realize that they actually were able to stay in the upper portion of the jail for a little while. Once in a while they stayed there. It was still cold. And then they, on occasion where they were actually released and able to go for some short walks, have a meal at a nearby tavern. And they even had opportunities to speak to their lawyer on occasion about situations that were going on. They had visitors come to see them. Emma came, we know, a few times in December and also in January. On a couple of those occasions, she brought Joseph Smith III with her. And he recalled that his father gave him a blessing on one of those occasions there in that dungeon cell. Well, Joseph continues to write these amazing letters that are just lengthy, and 121, 120 through 123 again. Let me share with you one other part here that I think is just, it's so great that we have these Joseph Smith papers that have allowed us to see these writings and these letters that connect us to the scriptures, because listen to this first part, and then you'll recognize the last part. Joseph wrote, "Those who have not been enclosed within the walls of a prison without a cause of provocation can have but little idea of how sweet the voice of a friend is. One token of friendship from any source whatever awakens and calls into action every sympathetic feeling. It brings up in an instant everything that is past, and when the heart is sufficiently contrite, then the voice of inspiration steals along and whispers, My son, peace be unto thy soul. Thine adversity and thine afflictions shall be but a small moment. And then, if thou endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high. You recognize that last part. That is a portion of those letters that Joseph wrote while he was there in the Liberty Jail. And it really gives us a feeling for what that was like. Well, let me just give you one other little part here before I close to think back about how this place was miraculously preserved. You just saw the picture there that Dave was showing of the rotunda that actually surrounds the original jail cell that was there. Um, Joseph again was incarcerated there with these men in 1839, and it continued to be used until 1856 as a prison, and then they actually used it to store ice. I mean, think about that for just a second. To store ice. That tells you how cold that was. Even in the summertime, they were storing ice there. So that tells you how cold that dungeon cell must have been, especially during the coldest months from December until the first part of April. Just a horrible, horrific experience for them. Well, it was vacant for many, many years and began to crumble up until the year about 1900, and then the preservation began. A man by the name of Stevens actually purchased the site and built this beautiful home, a really nice home right over the top of the old jail. And he used the floor and the walls of the old jail in helping to construct the foundation of his new home. And the church purchased eventually that home from Mr. Stevens and used it as a missionary residence for several years. And later it was torn down. And the church then built this beautiful rotunda around it, dedicated by President Joseph Fielding Smith, who was a grandson of Hiram, who was in that jail. And that was in 1963. And so you can see that rotunda there today. We're grateful to historian Andrew Jensen, who visited that site all the way back in 1888, and he took these precise measurements. So we know how terrible it was for Joseph and the leaders, because it was 14 by 14 and a half feet, the inside. Can you imagine being caught up in that? I mean, I know we're all going through this staying inside right now with what's going on with COVID-19, but 14 by 14 and a half feet, 4 feet thick walls, he said, 4 feet thick, virtually inescapable for those men to get out. But they do have the original door to the Liberty Jail. You can find it today and see it in the Independence Temple, in their museum that they have downstairs in the Community of Christ, I should say, Independence Temple. And in that museum, they have the door. Inside the visitor center, when you do the virtual tour, and hopefully within a short time you'll be able to really go back inside, you can see the original key to that door that we have there in our Liberty Jail Visitor Center. But I'm grateful for Liberty Jail, the experience that we read about with Joseph and these other men. I think we learn a great deal about adversity and trials and what it means to endure things well. And I hope that you'll think about it as you read more about Liberty Jail, how the Lord has helped you to triumph over your foes and brought peace to your soul, as Joseph learned from Heavenly Father in these sacred revelations that he wrote down in the Liberty Jail. So I know, Dave, you're with.
I'm so sorry. Let me get Daren back on here. That was my fault. Technology.
It's all right.
Daren, you back there? I kicked you out, back in. I'm so sorry about that.
I'm here.
That was incredible. You'll see we're back in the car. It's a rare shot of Corey actually driving, but no. Thank you. What an incredible storyteller and historian that you are, and to bring the Liberty Jail to life. In fact, one of there's others, resources we have. One of our sponsors is Living Scriptures, and they recently made the movie Out of Liberty.
Yeah.
And that's available on their streaming. But those of you that don't like to read and just want to watch a good movie, no, you could like both, right? But jump on there and stream that one. That's a great resource. But we'll put the link on there, Pam said, and that'll be great for you. But Daren, thank you so much for that. And I know you could go on for a long time, and sometimes it's hard to cut that down, and we could have listened to you the whole time. But
I appreciate
we are headed now to Independence. In fact, speaking of that key you talked about,
yeah,
in Carl's living room, he had a replica of that
of the
key.
Liberty Jail door.
And, yeah,
oh, that's cool.
So pretty cool.
Yeah.
But anyways, thank you. And again, we've left Liberty and are on our way to Independence. And Anthony Sweat's going to join us from there.
Awesome.
So it'll be exciting to do that. But thank you so much for your words and your testimony, and for your faithful, like Brother Holbrook, right? And what an awesome story and testimony of his resolve to follow the prophet, and hopefully we can emulate that as well. So thank you so much again, and we'll talk to you soon.
You guys are doing great stuff. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. Take
you bet.
care.
Okay, bye-bye now.